The biochemistry of hormones. In the first part of the lecture, we were able to discuss basic principles one needs to know to understand the physiologic response of a target cell. In this section, we are going to talk about the synthesis of the hormones, synthesis of the steroid hormones. Hormones are classified in several ways. It can be classified biochemically based on its composition. Polypeptide hormones are hormones coming from the hypothalamus, the anterior and the posterior pituitary gland, the kidneys, the parathyroid gland, and the pancreas. Hormones coming from the adrenals, the testes, and the ovaries use cholesterol as the basic substrate, and the calcitriol, which is vitamin D3, is a cholesterol derivative hormone from the skin, liver, and the kidneys. The thyroid gland and the catecholamines are tyrosine derivatives. The following are examples of polypeptide hormones. The thyrotropin-releasing hormone is the shortest polypeptide hormone known to man, composed of 3 amino acids. The parathyroid hormone is a bit longer, and the adenocorticotropic hormone is also a linear hormone. On the other hand, the polypeptide hormone insulin is composed of 2 chains, an A chain and a B chain. It has 3 disulfide bonds, 1 intrachain disulfide bond in the A chain, and 2 disulfide bonds between the A and the B chain. The follicular stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, thyroid-stimulating hormone, and human chorionic gonadotropin are glycoprotein hormones. They are composed of an alpha and the beta subunit. The alpha subunit is similar to all 4, and the difference is only in the beta subunit. And because of this structural similarity, cross-reaction can occur. Therefore, a patient with a lot of TSH will be interpreted by the human body as having a lot of LH or a lot of FSH. As I have mentioned earlier in the first part of the lecture, follicular stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormones need to be secreted in a pulsatile manner. Therefore, if the TSH is high, then FSH and LH pulsatility is lost, there will be no ovulation and no pregnancy will occur. The same thing is true for patients who are pregnant. Patients who are already pregnant will have high levels of the human chorionic gonadotropin. And because the levels of HCG is high, FSH and LH pulsatility will be lost, and with loss of foot pulsatility, there will be no further ovulation among women who are pregnant already. The following are the hormones that come from cholesterol. We have testosterone and estradiol, cortisol, and vitamin D3. Now, progesterone is the main source of the first 3 hormones, whereas vitamin D3 comes from cholesterol derivatives. On the other hand, T3, T4, norepinephrine, and epinephrine comes from tyrosine. Hormones are likewise classified based on the mechanism of action. Steroid hormones are hormones that will bind to intracellular receptors. There will be also hormones that will bind to cell surface receptors, which will stimulate cyclic AMP, stimulate cyclic GMP, stimulate calcium or phosphatidyl inositides, and stimulate kinase or phosphatase cascades. These were discussed in signal transduction. Based on all of these properties, we can classify hormones into group 1 or group 2 hormones. Group 1 hormones are steroid hormones, T3 and T4, calcitriol, and retinoic acid. These hormones are lipophilic. Being lipophilic, they will have problems with circulation. Thus, they need transport proteins to circumvent this solubility problem. And because they are attached to transport proteins, their half-life is long. Because they are lipophilic, the receptors are located inside the cell, whether it be in the cytoplasm or the nucleus. And the receptor hormone complex per se is the one that will mediate signal transduction. On the other hand, group 2 hormones are the polypeptide hormones and the glycoprotein hormones, including the catecholamines. They are hydrophilic. Being hydrophilic, there is no need for a transport protein, and thus the plasma half-life is short, occurring only in minutes. Because they are hydrophilic, the receptors are located in the plasma membrane and they need second messengers to mediate signal transduction. In the second part, we are going to talk about the synthesis of steroid. First, we talk about the synthesis of hormones from cholesterol. Cholesterol, as we have mentioned earlier, is the source of all steroid hormones. This comes from the plasma as cholesterol and some in the form of acetyl-CoA. These cholesterol should be esterified and stored in cytoplasmic lipid droplets. And the stimuli for the storage would be either ACTH for the adrenal gland and the luteinizing hormone for the ovaries and the testes. Once LH and ACTH activates its receptor, the G protein complex is stimulated, thus increasing levels of cyclic AMP intracellularly. And when cyclic AMP is stimulated, a protein kinase is activated, causing phosphorylation of several proteins. One protein would be esterase. Esterase is an enzyme that will activate or release free cholesterol from the droplets or esters. The next important step is the activation of the STAR, or the steroidogenic acute regulatory protein, which transports the cholesterol from the cytoplasm into the mitochondria. This is the known rate-limiting step in the process. And finally, phosphorylation of the side chain cleavage enzyme will happen, thus converting cholesterol to become pregnenolone. This process was discussed in the first part. We have cholesterol converted to pregnenolone via the activation of the side chain cleavage enzyme, either by ACTH in the adrenals or LH in the ovaries and the testes. Once progesterone is produced, progesterone will now be the source for the mineralocorticoids, example, and the most potent will be aldosterone, glucocorticoids or cortisol, and the androgens. And these androgens, if metabolized, will now become estrogens. Adrenal steroidogenesis. Cholesterol is acted upon by the cytochrome 450 side chain cleavage enzyme to produce pregnenolone. The 3-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase and isomerase enzyme will act on pregnenolone to produce progesterone. And further hydroxylation of progesterone by the 21-hydroxylase and the 11-beta-hydroxylase enzyme produces corticosterone, a potent glucocorticoid. It has a weak mineralocorticoid activity. Eventually, 18-hydroxylase enzyme, also known as the aldosterone synthase enzyme, will act on corticosterone to produce aldosterone, the most potent mineralocorticoid in the adrenals. Pregnenolone and progesterone can be acted upon by the 17-hydroxylase enzyme to produce 17-hydroxypregnenolone and 17-hydroxyprogesterone. Conversion of pregnenolone to progesterone can be also done by 3-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase and isomerase enzyme. This is further hydroxylated by 21-hydroxylase and 11-beta-hydroxylase enzyme to produce cortisol, the most potent glucocorticoid in the adrenals. Most of the 17-hydroxypregnenolone is acted upon by the 17,20-lyase enzyme to produce dehydroepiandrosterone. This dehydroepiandrosterone is again acted upon by the 3-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase and isomerase enzyme to produce androstenedione. Some 17-hydroxyprogesterone can also be converted to androstenedione, but it seems that in the adrenals and in humans, the preferred pathway is the pathway to produce dehydroepiandrosterone. Androstenedione, acted upon by the 17-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase enzyme, will produce testosterone. It is important to note that the adrenal hormone synthesis is divided between the different cells. The adrenal medulla will be producing the catecholamines, and the adrenal cortex will be producing the aldosterone, cortisol, and the androgens. And in the adrenal cortex, the zona glomerulosa exclusively produces aldosterone, and it's the zona fasciculata and reticularis which produces cortisol and androgens. If we look at this pathway, one will wonder about the cellular specificity of the adrenal steroidogenesis. How come the zona glomerulosa exclusively produces aldosterone? This is the pathway taken by the adrenal glomerulosa, and looking at this, the reason for the exclusive production of aldosterone by the zona glomerulosa is because of the fact that it is the only one with the hydroxylase, the 18-hydroxylase enzyme, or the aldosterone synthase enzyme. The zona fasciculata and reticularis does not have this enzyme. On the other hand, this seems to be the pathway that is taken by the zona fasciculata and reticularis. If this is the pathway taken by the fasciculata and reticularis, and if we're going to look at this, it seems that the zona glomerulosa can also produce cortisol and testosterone. However, the glomerulosa does not produce that. Why? Because the zona glomerulosa does not have the 17-alpha hydroxylase enzyme, thus making this pathway exclusive for the fasciculata and the reticularis. With the understanding of the biochemistry of the synthesis of these hormones, we now come to understand how the adrenal gland responds to stress. Chronic stress at that, is sensed by the hypothalamus, thus stimulating the release of releasing hormone, the corticotropin releasing hormone. The corticotropin releasing hormone will go to the anterior pituitary gland, and in the anterior pituitary gland, the adenocorticotropic hormone is released, going now to the adrenal cortex. And in the adrenal cortex, it will now stimulate the release of mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids. The glucocorticoids will now stimulate sodium and water retention by the kidneys, thus increasing blood pressure and increasing blood volume, whereas glucocorticoids will now convert proteins to glucose in the process of gluconeogenesis and alter the immune system response. The glucocorticoid cortisol will now induce gluconeogenesis. First, It's going to induce production of pyruvate. How? By increasing or stimulating the PEP carboxylase enzyme and the pyruvate carboxylase enzyme. Once pyruvate is produced, cortisol will now stimulate the fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase enzyme, and eventually it will also stimulate the glucose 6-phosphatase enzyme to produce glucose, thus stimulating the process of gluconeogenesis. Understanding the adrenal steroidogenesis will help one understand the androgenital syndromes. These are diseases or syndromes that result if glucocorticoid biosynthesis is impeded when one of the hydroxylases is lacking, the 11-beta hydroxylase or the 21-hydroxylase enzyme. In patients with androgenital syndrome, the 21-hydroxylase or the 11-beta hydroxylase enzymes are absent. And because these are absent, aldosterone and cortisol synthesis are impeded. The low levels of aldosterone and the low levels of cortisol will send positive feedbacks to the hypothalamus, and ACTH will be continuously released. Even if there is continuous release of the ACTH, because there is no enzyme, no amount of stimulation of ACTH will increase the levels of cortisol and aldosterone. Therefore, the adrenal gland will be overworked, thus the resulting adrenal hyperplasia. Also, because there is adrenal hyperplasia and continuous adrenal stimulation, there will be hyperandrogenism. Only testosterone will be continuously produced, and cortisol and or aldosterone will remain absent. Clinical application. I have here a patient. She is an 18-year-old female. She was diagnosed to have congenital adrenal hyperplasia due to 21-hydroxylase enzyme deficiency at the 3rd day of life. She was given cortisol, but she was lost to follow-up. Her mother just continued giving her cortisol. She came back at 17. She was obese with Cushingoid syndrome. At that time, the hydrocortisone was adjusted, and because the hydrocortisone was adjusted, the obesity became less apparent. She is now 18-year-old with this body, and she is on mineralocorticoid replacement. Her complaint was recurrent urinary tract infection. On examination of her genital area, it was noted that she has a disorder of sexual differentiation. She has a clitoromegaly and she has labial fusion. And why is this so? Because she has congenital adrenal hyperplasia, she has hyperandrogenism in utero. And because this external female genitalia was exposed to high levels of androgen, her external genitalia is androgenized, thus causing clitoromegaly and labial fusion. And she now has primary amenorrhea. Why does she have primary amenorrhea? Although she has a lot of testosterone, there is not enough aromatase enzyme to convert this testosterone to stimulate the uterus so that it will become mature, so that the endometrium will thicken to cause her menstruation. Testicular steroidogenesis. The production of the steroid by the testicular hormone does not involve two hormones. It only needs the luteinizing hormone for steroidogenesis. The follicular stimulating hormone and testosterone are the hormones that are necessary for spermatogenesis. Yes, we have mentioned that the pathway for steroidogenesis is common for the adrenal, the testes, and the ovaries. However, the testis does not produce aldosterone and cortisol. This is the pathway of steroidogenesis in the testes. The cholesterol here, pregnenolone, and there are two parallel pathways. If we are going to rearrange it, we have here cholesterol, progesterone, androstenedione. Pregnenolone becomes hydroxypregnenolone, dehydroepiandrosterone, but eventually they will both produce testosterone. So what do we see here? We see two distinct pathways. One would be the progesterone pathway and the other would be the dehydroepiandrosterone pathway. Which pathway it will take will depend on which enzyme acts first. If pregnenolone is acted upon by the 3-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, it enters the progesterone pathway. But if pregnenolone is acted upon by the 17-hydroxylase enzyme, it enters the dehydroepiandrosterone pathway. It seems that the dehydroepiandrosterone pathway is the preferred pathway for the adrenals, the testes, and the ovaries. Now, once the testis produces the testosterone in the target cell, this testosterone will be acted upon by the 5-alpha hydroxylase enzyme to produce dihydrotestosterone. Now, the androgen receptor can also attach to the testosterone itself or will attach to the dihydrotestosterone. As we have mentioned, the androgen receptor has a higher affinity for dihydrotestosterone compared to testosterone. This testosterone receptor complex or dihydrotestosterone receptor complex will attach to the androgen receptor or androgen response element to produce all of this physiologic response that we have or we expect of testosterone. So, if you have a patient, I've shown you a patient with increases in levels of testosterone, then you see what happens. What happens if there is patient manifesting with low levels of testosterone? Then you will think of either problem with the hormone concentration or problems in the receptor. Example, a patient, Casey, 25 years old, female, she comes in the clinic complaining of no menses. She was noted to have a thelarche at 13 years old and pubarch was at 15. On examination, she has no axillary hair. Her breasts are Tanner stage 5, but she has bilateral inguinal masses. Her pubic hair is scanty, and on examination, she has no uterus, and the karyotype is XY. Explain. She has androgen insensitivity syndrome. In other words, she has no receptor or there is a post-receptor defect. Therefore, her target glands do not respond to the androgen testosterone. That's why there is no or little hair, because we know that in the hair follicle, testosterone is the key. Testosterone is converted to dihydrotestosterone. Second, what are these bilateral inguinal masses? These bilateral inguinal masses are her testes, her undescended testes. How come her external genitalia is female, normal female? Again, in the sexual differentiation, if a patient is XY, the internal reproductive organ is testis, but the external reproductive organ is female. Why? For a male external genitalia to develop, it needs testosterone. And because this patient has androgen insensitivity, it does not respond to testosterone, even if she were XY, even if the gonads were secreting testosterone, there was no effect in the peripheral gland. How now can I explain the development of the breast? O nakakahiya naman, mas maganda pa yung breast niya kaysa sa inyo. Diba? So, how? Because she has testosterone, this testosterone undergoes peripheral conversion, extraglandular metabolism in the liver, in the adipose tissue, even in the breast. Thus, in the breast, walang androgen to stop breast development, plus the testosterone is converted to become estrogen, thus the development of her breast. So I hope you see the importance of understanding biochemistry so that you can treat your patients. It is not just only for diabetes, it is not only for hyperthyroidism, but it is also for disorders of sexual development. Ovarian steroidogenesis. There are three kinds of estrogen that are produced. We have estrone, estradiol, and estriol. They said that estrone is the estrogen of the menopause, estradiol is the estrogen of the reproductive age woman, and estriol is the estrogen of pregnancy. Going back, the ovarian steroidogenesis follows the same pathway, and in the ovary, just like in the testes and in the adrenal glands, the dehydroepiandrosterone pathway is the one that is preferred. So, from the production of testosterone and androstenedione, these two will be acted upon by the aromatase enzyme to produce estradiol and to produce estrone. The production of hormones in the ovary is not as simple as the production of hormones in man. There are several cells that are involved. We have here the theca cells and we have here the granulosa cell. So this is an actual picture of a mature Graafian follicle. These are the theca cells and these are the granulosa cells. The granulosa cells and the theca cells are separated by a basement membrane. This is the basement membrane. Why? Because ovarian steroidogenesis is complex. Ovarian steroidogenesis is a bit complex compared to the testicular steroidogenesis. So kahit biochemistry, even molecular level, mas complex ang babae kaysa sa lalaki. Okay. The follicular development is characterized by two phases, the follicular phase and the luteal phase. The follicular phase means the follicle is growing. In the luteal phase, the corpus luteum is formed. There are two cells that I've shown you a while ago, the theca cell and the granulosa cell. And there are two gonadotropins that are important for the ovarian steroidogenesis, the luteinizing hormone and the follicular stimulating hormone. Now, what happens during the two-cell, two-gonadotropin principle of ovarian steroid hormone production? The theca cell will be stimulated by the luteinizing hormone, converting cholesterol to become androstenedione. The androstenedione has to be transported to the granulosa cell so that estradiol is produced. Why? Because the theca cell do not have the aromatase enzyme. So walang aroma ang theca. The aromatase enzyme is only present in the granulosa cell. Therefore, the theca cell needs the help of the granulosa cell. And once the androstenedione is brought to the granulosa cell, the follicular stimulating hormone will now activate cyclic AMP, activate aromatase enzyme, convert androstenedione to become estradiol, the two-cell, two-gonadotropin theory. So how do we remember? Let's make a code. We have here LH and theca cell. Si Lorna Tolentino may cleavage. LH, theca cell, side chain cleavage enzyme. Here, granulosa cell, FSH aromatase, ang girlfriend ko may aroma. Granulosa cell, FSH, and aromatase enzyme. The purpose of the two-cell, two-gonadotropin theory is so that there will be estradiol production. In the follicular phase, we need a lot of estrogen. Why? Because estradiol peak will now stimulate LH peak and then eventually stimulate ovulation. A third hormone is produced by the granulosa cell, which is inhibin. Inhibin is important so that it sends negative feedback to the pituitary so that FSH release is inhibited. Wow! Why do we want FSH release to be inhibited? Because we want only one follicle to develop. Okay? So ma'am, if the FSH is inhibited, how can now the granulosa cell produce estradiol peak to cause LH peak? Why? Because this granulosa cell has a lot of FSH receptors. The FSH itself has upregulated the receptors in the granulosa cell. Therefore, the chosen follicle is the one with a lot of FSH receptor. The chosen follicle, because it has a lot of FSH receptor, is the one that produces a lot of estradiol. We want monofollicular development because the human uterus is designed to carry only one pregnancy. Now, what happens during the follicular phase? During the follicular phase, the corpus luteum is formed. What is a corpus luteum? The basement membrane between the theca cell and the granulosa cell is broken, and the theca cell becomes luteinized, the granulosa cell becomes luteinized. What happens in the luteinized theca cell? The same thing. In the luteinized theca cell, the luteinizing hormone converts cholesterol to androstenedione to produce the side via the action of the side chain cleavage enzyme. And androstenedione is brought to the granulosa cell so that it is converted to estradiol via the action of the FSH. Okay? Ma'am, bakit LH po yan? Okay. Now, where in the luteal phase, there is a second hormone that is produced. The second hormone that is produced is progesterone. Remember, progesterone was not produced in the follicular phase. It is only produced in the luteal phase. And who produces it? The granulosa cell. Wait, ma'am, I am confused. Okay? The granulosa cell actually can convert cholesterol to become progesterone. The granulosa cell therefore has the side chain cleavage enzyme. So ma'am, if the granulosa cell has the side chain cleavage enzyme, therefore in the follicular phase, the granulosa cell can actually produce its own androstenedione. The answer is no. The granulosa cell in the follicular phase has no blood supply. And because it has no blood supply, it cannot get cholesterol from the plasma. Now, after ovulation, when the granulosa cell becomes luteinized, microvascularization will now give the ability for LDL to go inside the granulosa lutein cell. Therefore, LDL is now the source for cholesterol. Now we have progesterone. So, ma'am, how come it stops at progesterone? How come progesterone is not converted to androstenedione? Why? The granulosa cell has the aromatase enzyme. The granulosa cell has the side chain cleavage enzyme. The granulosa cell, so to produce progesterone, ano yung meron siya? The 3-beta isomerase enzyme, but the granulosa cell do not have the 17-hydroxylase enzyme. Therefore, progesterone stops there. It is no longer converted to become androstenedione. Please refer to the pathway to remember this. Okay. So what happens if the woman becomes pregnant? If the woman becomes pregnant, then this progesterone production and estrogen production continues. The LDL continues to supply, and this time with pregnancy comes the production of the human chorionic gonadotropin. The human chorionic gonadotropin is secreted by the trophoblast. So, saan galing ang trophoblast? With pregnancy, there will be implantation of the blastocyst, and with the implantation of the blastocyst comes the penetration of the trophoblast, and with the trophoblast penetration, now production of HCG. Okay? When HCG is produced, it now prolongs the life of the corpus luteum. Ma'am, how come HCG? Remember the four hormones? TSH, FSH, LH, and HCG? LH and HCG are so similar that HCG will also activate the receptor, eventually telling the corpus luteum continue production of estrogen, continue production of progesterone. Why? Because continuous production of estrogen and progesterone are necessary to maintain pregnancy in the first 10 weeks. Why? The placenta becomes developed only at around 8 to 10 weeks of pregnancy. Therefore, in the first 8 to 10 weeks of pregnancy, it is the corpus luteum that maintains the pregnancy. So I hope you appreciate the difference between the production in the follicular phase and the production in the luteal phase of pregnancy. And in the luteal phase, we see the difference here. The granulosa cell does not only produce estradiol, the granulosa cell produces progesterone as well. This will be further discussed when you go to third year or when you go to second year in physiologic obstetrics. So what happens when a woman is menopausal? You said, Doctora, that when a woman is menopausal, the main hormone is estrone. When a woman is menopausal, she no longer have follicles. When she doesn't have follicles, she doesn't have the granulosa cell and the theca cell. And without the granulosa cell and the theca cell, therefore, there will be no aromatase enzyme production, no conversion of androstenedione and testosterone to estrone. Although the ovary continues to produce small levels or minute levels of androstenedione and testosterone, where is now the source of estrogen for the menopausal woman? Extraglandular conversion. Androstenedione mainly is converted to estrone in the peripheral tissue, in the liver and in the adipose tissue, so that the woman will still have her estrogen at menopause. However, because estrone is a weaker estrogen, then biologic activity is not as high as estradiol. What about estriol? We said estriol is the estrogen during pregnancy. Estrogen production during pregnancy, again, is different. It reflects the unique interaction between the fetal adrenal gland, the fetal liver, the placenta, and the maternal adrenal gland. So, this time, estrone, peripheral conversion, estradiol in the ovary, estriol, pati fetal adrenal, fetal liver, tsaka si placenta na ang involved. Let's look. What happens in the steroidogenesis during pregnancy? In the first 8 to 10 weeks of pregnancy, it is the corpus luteum that produces estrogen and progesterone. After 10 weeks of pregnancy, the placenta takes over. It is now the one that will be producing the steroid. So, let's look at the production of the estrogen by the placenta. This pathway is what's supposed to be happening. However, in the placenta, the human trophoblast cannot use cholesterol or progesterone to serve as a precursor for estrogen biosynthesis. Why? Because the 17-hydroxylase 1720 lyase enzyme is not expressed in the placenta. And because it is not expressed in the human placenta, then, Houston, we have a problem. Where are we going to get the estradiol? At 10 weeks age of gestation, the placenta takes over. But Because the placenta cannot use the maternal cholesterol because of the absence of the enzyme, it needs other sources of androgens so that it can produce estradiol and it can produce estriol. Now comes the unique relationship between the fetal adrenal, the fetal liver, and the placenta. Because of the absence of the enzymes not expressed in the human placenta, the placenta will now use the fetal adrenal dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate as a source for estrogen. So, the dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate that is produced by the fetal androgen will now undergo several enzymatic steps, eventually leading to the production of estradiol. Thus, the placenta can now produce estradiol. So compared to the estrogen production in the ovary, estrogen production in the peripheral, the following enzymes are used by the placenta: the steroid sulfatase enzyme, the 3-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase, the aromatase enzyme, and the 17-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase enzyme. Therefore, the source of placental estradiol production is the fetal adrenal dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate. But you said, doctor, that the placenta or the estrogen of pregnancy is estriol. So where does the placenta get estriol? The dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate coming from the fetal adrenal can be converted in the fetal liver to 16-hydroxy-dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate, and it will also undergo several enzymatic processes to produce estriol. Therefore, dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate for estradiol, hydroxy-dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate for estriol production. Knowing that the fetal adrenal and the fetal liver actively contributes to the substrate for placental estradiol and estriol production, there is established relationship between fetal well-being and placental estrogen production. In other words, if a pregnant woman will experience a sudden drop in the production of estrogen, then suspect fetal demise. What about progesterone production by the placenta? There is no 17-hydroxylase enzyme. But as you can see here, even in the absence of the 17-hydroxylase enzyme, maternal cholesterol can be converted to pregnenolone, can be converted to progesterone. So, this progesterone is continuously produced and the source will be the maternal cholesterol. So, compared to estrogen production, the major source of placental progesterone production is the mother's LDL cholesterol. Clinical application. If the baby is dead in utero, will it affect progesterone production? The answer is no, because the source of progesterone is the mother, not the baby, compared to estrogen. When the baby is dead, the source of estrogen production is the baby. Thus, there is no relationship between fetal well-being and placental progesterone production. Now let's go to the molecular mechanism of action of these hormones. It is 17-beta estradiol, which is the most biologically potent, naturally occurring estrogen. Just like any steroid hormone, it is transported by its transport protein to its target cell, crosses the plasma membrane, and is met by its receptor. There are two estrogen receptors. We have the estrogen receptor alpha and the estrogen receptor beta. Now the estrogen receptor complex will now bind to the estrogen response element in the DNA, and eventually it will produce transcriptional factors to produce transcription, translation, and physiologic response. And we know that the physiologic response is necessary so that we can see its action. An mRNA is produced, and this is interpreted by the ribosome, thus producing the necessary protein that is important to mediate estrogen action. Progesterone is also a steroid hormone. Just like the estrogen, it has two receptors, the progesterone receptor A and progesterone receptor B. There are studies that have shown that progesterone also has a receptor that is associated with the G protein. However, its action is unclear. Because it's a steroid hormone, it will also bind to its progesterone response element to initiate transcription. It is important to note that when both progesterone receptor A and progesterone receptor B are present in a cell, progesterone receptor A seems to inhibit the progesterone receptor B gene regulation. There are also studies showing that progesterone can increase intracellular calcium. This increase in intracellular calcium may be the result of the progesterone receptor acting on a G protein associated one. Synthesis of calcitriol from cholesterol derivatives. Calcitriol is synthesized from 7-dehydrocholesterol, thus producing vitamin D3. This synthesis involves the skin, the liver, and the kidneys. 25-hydroxylation in the liver is necessary. This is the first obligatory reaction for the production of 1,25-hydroxy-D3. In the kidneys, these hormones will be acted upon by renal ferredoxin reductase, renal ferredoxin, and the cytochrome P450 group of enzymes, eventually producing 1,24,25-hydroxy-D3. Both catecholamines and thyroid hormones come from tyrosine. The synthesis of catecholamines is initiated by the conversion of tyrosine to become DOPA via the action of tyrosine hydroxylase enzyme. This is the rate-limiting step in the synthesis of catecholamines. DOPA becomes dopamine via the action of DOPA decarboxylase enzyme, and eventually becomes norepinephrine via the action of dopamine beta hydroxylase enzyme. Norepinephrine becomes epinephrine once it is acted upon by the PNMT or the phenylethanolamine N-methyltransferase enzyme. This PNMT, please take note, is induced by cortisol. 80% of the epinephrine is produced in the medulla, and this is not made in the extramedullary tissue. What happens if an individual experiences stress? Acute stresses initially stimulates the higher center, and the higher center will send afferent signals to the adrenal medulla, thus stimulating epinephrine and norepinephrine synthesis. Therefore, there will be glycogenolysis, increases in blood pressure, increases in the respiratory rate, metabolic rate, and even changes in the blood flow patterns. This is different compared to response of an individual in chronic stress. When there is stress, the catecholamine production of epinephrine and norepinephrine is initiated by the release of cortisol upon stimulation of the ACTH. And upon stimulation of cortisol, cortisol will now stimulate PNMT, and PNMT converts norepinephrine to become epinephrine so that physiologic response is seen. After the release of this norepinephrine and epinephrine, there will now be stimulation of glycogenolysis and inhibition of glycogenesis. Epinephrine will stimulate glycogenolysis via the action or stimulation of the glycogen phosphorylase enzyme, and it will inhibit glycogenesis by inhibiting glycogen synthase enzyme. Thyroid hormones also come from tyrosine. There are several unique properties of thyroid hormone synthesis. It requires iodine for biologic activity. It requires thyroglobulin. Thyroglobulin is a large precursor molecule for the thyroid hormones. This thyroglobulin is stored in the colloid of the thyroid. There is peripheral conversion of T4 to become T3, which is known to be the more active hormone. Thyroglobulin, the large precursor of T4 and T3, is an iodinated glycosylated protein which has two large subunits. This large protein contains 115 tyrosine residues, and this is a potential site for iodination. 70% of the tyrosine residues are in the form of MIT and DIT, and only 30% is in the form of T4 and T3. The thyroglobulin storage of these tyrosine residue is important because it provides the conformation required so that there is coupling of the tyrosyl residues. Thyroid hormone synthesis requires iodine. The thyroid is the only tissue that can oxidize iodide into its higher valence state. Thus, metabolism of iodine is involved in the thyroid hormone synthesis, namely concentration, oxidation, iodination, and coupling. Initially, we have here the thyroid cell, and this is the colloid. Okay, we have the first process, which would be concentration. That would be concentration of iodide, and once concentration happens, this iodide is brought into the colloid for oxidation so that it can attach to the thyroglobulin molecule via the process of iodination. Once iodination happens, these tyrosyl residues will now couple with each other, thus forming T3, T4, MIT, and DIT molecules. This is the large thyroglobulin molecule. Stored inside would be T3 and T4. And once a physiologic cue happens, this T3, T4 in the thyroglobulin molecule is now slowly released. This is stimulated by the TSH. The TSH will now stimulate the TSH receptor, and this TSH receptor will increase cyclic AMP. And increases in cyclic AMP will stimulate concentration, will stimulate peroxidase enzymes to stimulate oxidation, iodination, and even coupling. Antithyroid drugs are directed towards these receptors. The molecular mechanism of action of the thyroid hormone is quite complex. As was shown in the earlier lecture in signal transduction and the earlier parts of this lecture, the thyroid hormone will attach to its receptor, which is already attached to the thyroid hormone response element, thus causing physiologic response. When T3 and T4 reaches its target gland, we will have now signals. Initially, we said T4 is acted upon by the deiodinase enzyme to convert it to T3. Why? Because T3 is the preferred substance for the thyroid receptors. Just like the estrogen and progesterone, there are also two known thyroid receptors, the thyroid receptor alpha and the thyroid receptor beta. Eventually, signal transduction is stimulated. There will be protein production and physiologic response. We've now reached the end of the discussion of the synthesis of the steroid hormones. For part 3 of the lecture series, we're going to talk about the synthesis of polypeptide and glycoprotein hormones. If you do have any questions in this part, please make notes and I will try to answer them in the lecture hour. The biochemistry of hormones.